light within our hearts, light within our thoughts, light within our words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show, I have my friend Eric Breault. I don't think we need to argue about whether spiritual realities are real. The problem is they're invisible. They're unconfirmable. They're perceptions. I mean, ultimately all we have is our perceptions. And trying to prove that our perceptions are real can become quite a conundrum at times.
It can be, yeah.
And I guess that's where a lot of people would kind of dismissively almost make a remark about, well, that's why we have faith. I believe in faith as something powerful and real and important, but I don't think it should be an excuse for not subjecting things to inquiry. You know, subjecting things to accountability. We have perceptions, and sometimes our perceptions are accurate and sometimes they're inaccurate. But to a large degree, they're all we have to go on. I would say they're enough to go on.
I do, yeah, me too. It's a challenge when you have skeptics out there that are challenging our faith and our belief in what we trust and what comes true. And my experience, I know my depth of my being that the invisible is there. The beings that are angels, archangels that I work with are there. I can sense them. Sometimes I can feel fingers, hands on my body, just gentle, loving touch to let me know that everything's okay. It's those skeptics are there to, I believe, for me personally, is like testing our faith and trust in our own spiritual beliefs, awareness of our surroundings. It's like, I don't think there's any such thing as archangels. I don't think there's any such thing as heaven or whatever it is, or another reality other than this. It's just this. And
I guess I would say perhaps for you there isn't.
No.
I mean, that's what I would say to that person.
Yeah.
You know, perhaps for you there isn't. For me there is. But I don't think we need to consider perceptions untrue just because we can't confirm them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it also requires a significant amount of humility on our part, not being arrogant or overconfident about, well, I've got my spiritual guide, so of course I'm right. That's the opposite direction,
Mm-hmm.
which brings with it all sorts of other problems.
Trying to prove that we're right, and that's where ego comes into the picture.
Well, or being overconfident about it.
Yeah, overconfident about it. It's just finding that balance. And yes, I have skepticism, and it's healthy to have some form of skepticism. There are those that are this angle to this angle, two opposite angles.
Mm-hmm.
It's just finding that middle ground.
Well, and holding yourself accountable.
Yes.
That if something starts to consistently not happen the way you expect, that would be the first warning flag to say, maybe I need to go back and reflect upon this for a while before I tell anybody else. And see whether I was wrong in the first place, whether something has changed, because sometimes things can change.
Yeah.
It's not inconceivable to me that someone might have a guardian angel at one point in their life who, for whatever reason, isn't there at another point in their life. Mm-hmm. Maybe he, she, it has been reassigned, or maybe it was something needed at that point in their lives that doesn't need to be there anymore. Maybe they've outgrown that, or maybe it was someone to help with a particular phase of their growth, and once they complete that phase, they move on to another phase, and they have different spiritual collaborators.
There are many things. There's an example of dark night of a soul. When people enter that space, they don't feel anything or sense anything. It's like a trial period, a trial.
For people who have never heard that term, the dark night of the soul?
It's when somebody gets into the darkest spaces or in a deep depression.
Does it mean they've done something wrong?
Not necessarily. I believe it's actually a transition period for them, spiritual
Okay.
transition. They're getting
The
ready for the
term
next
originally
step.
comes from one of the historical saints from several hundred years ago.
I'm not sure about that, but
I want to say Saint John of the Cross, but I'm not sure if that's right. But there was some saint. I thought it was somewhere back in possibly the Middle Ages or something, who originally coined the term about the dark night of the soul, because it was this extended period of praying and doing all this spiritual work and just not sensing anything. It was as if his soul was locked up in a dark space and he couldn't get out until it finally ran its course, I guess you could say.
yeah, it's just that.
Are you Old Testament scholar at all?
Not very much. No.
I'm trying to remember. There was one particular prophet, and I can't remember if it was Isaiah or Ezekiel, who talked about, or no, maybe it was Daniel. Daniel in the lion's den. Whoever it was a record I recall reading in the Old Testament where they were praying and fasting for an answer, and finally an angel showed up and basically announced, I've been trying to get to you for 30 days, but there has been so much between me and you that I had to fight my way through, that it took me 30 days to get here. And so it was this suggestion that it's not that there was nothing happening, but it was spiritual and invisible and consequently unconfirmable. But according to the angel's report, absolutely real. So much so that it was impossible to get communication through to this prophet for that amount of time because of all the spiritual warfare going on, of which the prophet was completely unaware.
There was a lot of challenges and a lot of energy, either negative or positive. It's almost like the dark and light are playing this battle of some sort, and at times we're clouded because it's very dark energy that's coming in, but necessarily if you're in a dark night of a soul, it's not necessarily dark energy. It's just you are in a period of just null where you need to process stuff that are getting ready to prepare you for the next expansion in consciousness that's taking place, awakening, that next step in life.
If we take a step back and use the metaphor of the natural world,
Yeah.
before there were any systems of human theology, Earth had hurricanes, earthquakes, grass fires caused by lightning. There were a lot of natural cycles that needed the catastrophic event in order to run their course. You know, I read somewhere that they discovered when there was a major forest fire that there were certain types of seeds or plants that wouldn't start their cycle over again until they were exposed to the heat of a fire. So it was almost like nature expected there to be a fire every so often to clean all the old stuff out and to make all the seeds pop and start growing again. Because until they were heated, the seeds had a hard shell that wouldn't open, I guess, according to the article I read. And so the fire had it, I mean, it was a wild, uncontrolled, natural fire. It didn't burn off the entire continent. It burned for a while in a certain area. And then that area would begin in its own cycle again of new growth coming up, everything gradually being replaced. So it wasn't like in every place, there were some areas where trees weren't getting to be 500 years old because everything burned off every 100 years. You know, it wasn't every year, but it was maybe once every 100 years. So you've got hurricanes, you've got tidal waves, you've got grass fires, you've got droughts, all these things that are just part of the natural cycle. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but during those times, you have to wait for the storm to run its course, and you can't carry on life as normal. But it wasn't good or bad. It was just the natural way for things to be.
And you're in that state of with that chaos that's around you. It seems like chaos. The hurricane, the storm.
Well, and experientially, it would seem like chaos.
It seems chaos, but just sitting back during that time of transition as you're going through that chaos that's around you, that depression, the things not flowing the way you desire it to. Just sometimes you have to just sit back and just accept what's taking place, like accept the tsunami or earthquake or whatever that's taking place on our global standpoint, and just sometimes we just have to accept the situation and allow it to be, because it was necessary in order for a cleansing to take place.
Mm.
And sometimes in our chaos, we have to sit back and just, okay, I need to sit back and I just need to allow it for it to take place and just embrace this darkness I'm in, this depression or whatever it is, and eventually it'll get better. It's just going to get better eventually, and just trust the process. It's about trusting the process.
To some extent, it's about allowing one phase to come to closure.
Yes.
So that another phase can begin.
Yes.
There, in the movie Star Trek Insurrection, there was a point where a woman asked Captain Picard about, have you ever experienced a perfect moment, one where you could live in that moment indefinitely? And he contemplates, or he thinks deeply for a moment, and then responds, the first time I got to look at my homeworld from outer space. And she smiles and says, yes, there's nothing more complicated than perception. And, which of course is what we're talking about today, is that we perceive things and we need to sift our perceptions to figure out what part of it we're going to hang on to as something real, what part we're going to hang on to as something symbolic, and what part of it we may dismiss as a misperception or something that is just not consistent with anything. Where did that come from? I mean, we all have occasional weird dreams that don't seem to mean anything, and it's stuff that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It doesn't have to mean something.
No, and discernment is important. Taking what resonates with us, and not taking what doesn't resonate with us.
I mean, some of it is just extraneous fluff.
Yeah.
It's not all vital.
It's not necessarily all vital. I can give an example of a dream I had actually last night. I had a dream I was meeting with this guy. He was doing energy work, and we were in this church, and we were in this room and talking about other people doing Reiki and all that other stuff, and certain people cannot do it and other people are meant to do it. And then he just let me take your hands. I didn't know who this guy was, but he looked like some kind of guru, some kind of white beard and white hair. And I said,
kind of the stereotypical image of an elderly guru.
And I touched him, and suddenly, whoosh, and I felt like my back cracked or something. There was like an unalignment, and suddenly there was an alignment.
Okay.
And I woke up, and I'm like, what was that? And then I heard a silent voice, and it told me, once you draw your first picture, you will know who you are. It was like a phrase. And that was,
okay.
To me...
Once you draw your first picture, you will know who you are.
Yes, I think it was a metaphor of some sort.
Okay.
And I don't understand what it is, but I'm just going to let the message just happen, and I will know what it means eventually in the long run.
Okay.
To me, that was my guide speaking to me. And especially in that case where you have a dream and then get a message after the dream, that's typically somebody that's your guide. To me, I think it was one of probably a master of some sort. I didn't know who it was, but...
But what was the part that didn't really mean anything, that was just fluff?
The part that didn't mean it, to me, the whole thing meant something.
Okay.
Symbolically speaking.
Okay. A moment ago, though, we were talking about extra little bits that are thrown in.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say, for example, was it really that important that he have a white beard?
Not necessarily.
I mean, that was just an extra detail. And if it hadn't been there, it wouldn't have necessarily changed the message.
Yeah, and the details, the visuals were not important, but I think it was the experience that was important. Mm-hmm. The realignment of some sort.
But I've occasionally seen people get obsessive about the details.
Yes, they do.
And that's where I think things can get off track. And so, yes, you have a perception. Yes, you're reporting it honestly. I respect that. It doesn't necessarily mean that every detail is something to cling to.
No,
Because if you cling to things too tightly, you strangle the life out of them.
no, it's over analyzing it to death. That's not
Yeah,
helpful.
well, how did my friend put it? The paralysis of analysis.
Mhm.
When you are analyzing something so much that it essentially paralyzes you and keeps you from doing anything. I think if you're analyzing something in a way that empowers you for your next challenge, analyzing it in a way that you learn more about it, that you come to a deeper understanding, that's all very constructive. But at some point, the analysis is done and you need to stop and get back to work.
Yeah, because you can't dwell on it too much, and it's important to move on. It happened, okay. Things that being non-attached to it and moving on will allow you to progress spiritually and connect more, being more tuned into who you are. It just
See, but I also run into people who want to move on too quickly.
yes.
And they're not spending enough time with it to understand what it was saying, in my opinion.
Yes.
I mean, each person has to decide for themselves how much time something needs. I think it's important to give ourselves time to wrestle with the perceptions, to figure out which ones or which parts of one are the parts that we need to treasure and hang on to and remember, and maybe write down in a journal. I mean, one journal I read said that you should keep a pad of paper and a pencil right next to your bed, because there's always thoughts that come up when you first wake up, and if you don't write them down right away, you'll forget them, and they frequently don't come back. But if you have something there where you can record them before they slip away, then you can reference them later.
And going back to it, maybe the time you go back to it, you'll understand it. Even though at the time you didn't understand it, but later on, maybe a year down the road, you're like, oh, that makes sense now. You don't have to make sense of anything. Well, even what comes through spirit or whatever it is that comes through us for messages. It's just allow it, just embrace it, accept it, and move on.
I think some things are meant to be mysterious for a while, but I don't think that should be used as a casual excuse.
No.
We need to hold ourselves accountable. It's not that, from one perspective, yes, you can believe anything you want. From another perspective, I would say I really should only believe the things that have integrity for me. And if it doesn't ring true, if it doesn't have a sense of integrity for me, it's not something I'm supposed to hang on to.
Yeah. That's important. Because you have outside skeptics coming in and telling you it's not, and I've been tested because, for example, near-death experiences. We have one woman that says it's our brain chemistry that's causing near-death experiences.
Okay.
Then you have this other person saying, no, it is. So we have two different angles, and it's just, and I felt
Is there a sense in which they could both be true, though?
there was a sense, they both can be true. I've been thinking that I've been kind of like studying near-death experiences, and I've been trying to grasp her perspective as well as this perspective. It is probably chemical, but it's probably also spiritual. You know what I mean? When you meditate,
Well, and the spiritual coming into the physical will produce a chemical reaction in the brain.
yes, it will. And that's been coming to me and sort of in messages and as well. Because I was doubting it for a while. I was like, is there anything after death? She said, no. And he said, yes. I'll give an example of a blind person. A blind person sees pictures and colors and things that they shouldn't see. And this particular person who could never see could describe things after her near-death experiences that no blind person could. How do you explain that to this lady over here? There are certain things that happen.
What's that phrase? For those who believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who do not believe, no explanation will suffice.
I like that quote. Yeah, and
There's times for just believing, but I don't think we should do it too easily or too quickly. If we brought in a stage magician to perform some tricks, it looks like the bird in the cage disappeared. It's supposed to look like that. If the stage magician is especially good, he may even get you to believe that the bird really did disappear. Mm-hmm. The person who has done any reading about stage magic at all, however, would tell you that no, in all likelihood, the bird is still exactly where it was, but perception has been altered so that you cannot see the bird. Mm-hmm. On a similar note, I guess, some of the New Age metaphysicians with whom I've spoken want to couch everything on the criteria of belief. If you believe, it will happen, be, whatever. And I usually respond by asking them, how many times do I have to repeat the words, I can fly, before it's safe for me to jump off the building? Mm-hmm. And, which they immediately argue against the dialogue, but they don't answer the question. On one hand, I believe in faith and I believe in belief, but I don't think it's a hocus pocus, wave a magic wand kind of I get whatever I want. No. It's the merging of our physicality through perception with whatever is non-physical, in some ways beyond literal perception. I mean, you walk into a room and you sense something about some person in the room, but there's nothing physical that you can point to say why you feel that way. And yet somehow, deep inside, you know it to be true. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's a question we all need to think about at least once in our lives. How do I know the things that I know? And I don't know if there's an answer, but it's a question that still needs to be asked, if for no other reason than to keep ourselves humble.
Sometimes it's a safety mechanism. I've been to a place once, and I went into a bar in Canada, Quebec. I had to walk out because I was sensing a sense of doom, or a sense of very strong negative presence energy there. So I just had to walk out. It was just more of a safety mechanism and that intuition, that feeling, made me do the right thing to protect myself, my well-being.
Did you ever figure out why you felt that way?
Not really. I don't think I really needed to. It's just I just.
At the very least, it was someplace where you weren't supposed to be.
Yeah. And I didn't analyze it much, and I just allowed it to be.
And there's probably a lot of perceptions that really don't need to be justified, because we're not talking about major decisions associated with them.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that believe in angels. They won't talk about it, and that's because they don't feel a need to, because that's their knowing, and that's what they feel. They don't have to explain themselves. Many cultures, it's best to say less. You know what I mean? And because if you say too much, it'll ruin that beautiful energy.
I guess so, but
not to say that you can't talk about it with the right people. It's just there's certain people that you shouldn't talk to about it, because they're too skeptical, and they'll do nothing but to drag you down in your faith.
Well, and if what you're saying isn't helpful to them, and their expressions of skepticism aren't helpful to you, what is it that you're trying to accomplish by bringing that subject up in that context? I mean, it can't accomplish anything.
No, because it becomes a constant state of
headbutting and divisiveness, and
it won't work, and you can lose friends over it, even those who have different. But at the same time, you have differences, but don't discuss those differences with those particular, because it ruins friendships. And because these people just don't believe in that. Same thing with politics. There's certain things we cannot discuss.
Well, it's accepting that the other person is not at the same place you were at.
Yeah.
And there are probably good and bad implications of that. some limitations, but some things that make it more empowering. And even with not being able to talk about it, I guess I try to assure people that if they feel a need to talk, or if they need to think out loud, that I can be a good listener, at least up to a point. I can't indefinitely, but I can absorb a certain amount of being there to listen to you.
Yes.
While you work this out in whatever way you need to. We're just about out of time here, but any final comments on the whole arena of perception that you think people would be wise to keep in mind?
Just stay on their path and follow their intuition and trust who they are as a person. But don't dwell
When
on
you
it.
say they, you're referring to the person, him or herself.
Yeah, talking about a group to people that's watching the show, and just to trust it and just keep moving, and just don't stay stuck there, because if you stay stuck in that, overanalyzing it, you'll be stuck. If you just say, okay, thank you for showing that piece, move on.
Well, thank you very much for everything you've shared today, Eric.
Thank you very much.
And if you'd like to close us out with a final tone, and thank you everyone for watching.